Hello, everybody, and welcome to History Bite number 304, dated August the 25th, 2021. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. Thank you so much for tuning in. This History Bite is entitled President Calvin Coolidge, a Forgotten Champion of Equality for All. Before I begin, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Juarez Lee Shelton, M.A., and click on that little notification bell immediately to the right of the subscribe button. In doing so, you will receive notifications when I post new, exciting, and informative videos in history, law, political science, theology, and philosophy. Thank you in advance. So again, this video is discussing President Calvin Coolidge, who was a very, very assertive champion of equality for all Americans, something that he is virtually not known for at all. And, being the President of the United States, one is in a unique position to champion for the rights of individuals as a whole. Unfortunately, many of his calls, virtually all of his calls for the equality of all Americans fell upon deaf ears. And so we dive into this, and hopefully from it I'll expand your perspective somewhat. This was actually one of my writings from 2018 that I'm simply transmitting into video format. So without further ado, John Calvin Coolidge, 1872 to 1933, was, of course, the 30th President of the United States of America from 1923 to 1929, okay? He's a commander-in-chief that you rarely hear about, either actively or passively. Whenever people talk about the presidents of the United States, Calvin Coolidge's name is rarely mentioned. Have you ever heard it? Probably not, okay? Or if you have, you probably don't know much about the man, all right? And that alone represents a tremendous problem, in my opinion, with respect to American history. Did you know that as president in the 1920s, which was an era riddled with racism, sexism, and with the Ku Klux Klan at its height, Coolidge was a stalwart supporter of equal rights for African Americans, Native Americans, and women? Did you know that? Unlike many before, then, and since, okay, the president not only talked the talk, but he walked the walk, all right, which is rare from politicians today. With respect to African Americans, President Coolidge opposed racial segregation and supported black candidates for Congress and other offices. And he also despised the Ku Klux Klan to the bone. He also called upon the Congress to enforce the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, as well as for a federal anti-lynching law, okay? Sadly, but not surprisingly, none of his proposals bore much fruit. As we know, the Southern Democrats in Congress in that era opposed any measures to stop the oppression of African Americans. In 1924, Coolidge also gave the commencement speech at Howard University, of course located in our nation's capital. In that speech, he commended African Americans for their rapid advances in education, contributions to society in general, and their willingness to serve the nation in war, despite prevalent racism at home. His church, all right, he was a Congregationalist, was integrated, and that almost certainly contributed to Coolidge's egalitarian perspective. With respect to Native Americans, all right, that perspective was displayed with his broad support of the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. That law naturalized all Native Americans who were not yet full American citizens, okay? Before this act was enacted by the Congress, it was easier for a foreign-born person to become an American citizen than a Native American who was born and had spent their entire life in this country. In sum, the president's views on racial equality could be summed up in this way. I cannot consent to take the position that the door of hope, the door of opportunity, is to be shut upon any man, no matter how worthy, purely upon the grounds of race or color. All right, and that's actually Coolidge referencing a quote from former President Theodore Roosevelt, who was also a strong supporter of racial equality in this country. Finally, last but not least, with respect to women, President Coolidge was just as progressive in his views there. He was an early supporter of women's suffrage, all right, well before the adoption of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Similarly, while president, he maintained Mabel Walker Willebrandt, all right, Mabel Walker Willebrandt, if you want to do some research on her, as one of the highest ranking women in the Justice Department, all right, and in 1928 appointed Genevieve R. Klein to the United States Customs Court, which is now known as the United States Court of International Trade, all right, and this made Miss Klein America's first female federal judge, okay? Coolidge was often known as Silent Cal, all right? And that name was not a misnomer. You know, he chose his words carefully and very sparingly. So thus he was no FDR, Harry Truman, JFK, or LBJ when it came to vocal advocacy. Not at all right? By contrast, he was a very quiet and soft-spoken man, all right? But the words he did choose were very forceful and struck to the bone, all right? And his views on equality were known to all. The perspectives espoused by the president were indeed quite remarkable and ahead of the times, light years ahead of the times, and a surprise to both then and now. They were not exactly odd, however, for a man with deep religious convictions that was born and raised in New England. What is strange, however, is how Calvin Coolidge was so politically successful in an era which endorsed the opposite of what he believed with respect to race and gender, all right? His success is likely the result of being in the right office at the right time. Coolidge was governor of Massachusetts prior to becoming vice president and then president in 1923, all right? So he was in office at the right time. And while being progressive on civil rights, all right, he was a solid conservative where it mattered. Economics, all right? As long as the nation was prospering, and it was indeed in the 1920s, many people overlooked the president's views on racial and gender harmony. This was as long as their bank accounts were full. Undoubtedly, he knew that he could have it both ways, all right, to promote equality and prosperity, and it worked, folks. Make no mistake, Coolidge's commitment to equality was anything but purely political, all right, and he defended it against opponents on numerous occasions. It is refreshing to know that his egalitarian views overruled the times in which he lived, all right? So, thus, for his role in promoting the equality that the Constitution requires, Calvin Coolidge deserves to be ranked as a great president by those who have faced and still face oppression in this great nation. Coolidge once received a letter from a very discontented individual where he wanted to know if the president thought that America was a white man's country. And Coolidge responded to that letter, you know, in a very very tactful but very rebuking tone. All right, Coolidge did not believe America was a white man's country, so to speak, as more than just white men lived in America, and more than just white men had made America the great nation that it was and remains to this day. So, as an African American man, President Coolidge's particular empathy to the plight of American blacks in an era where we were, oppressed beyond words, his views and his positions cannot be overstated. All right. So here is an excerpt from his first State of the Union address, dated December 6th, 1923, nearly 98 years ago, at the time of this recording. All right. It is as follows. Numbered among our population are some 12 million colored people. Under our Constitution, their rights are just as sacred as those of any other citizen. It is both a public and private duty to protect those rights. The Congress ought to exercise all its powers of prevention and punishment against the hideous crime of lynching, of which the Negroes are by no means the sole sufferers, but for which they furnish a majority of the victims. Already a considerable sum is appropriated to give the Negroes vocational training in agriculture. About $500,000 is recommended for medical courses at Howard University to help contribute to the education of 500 colored doctors needed each year. On account of the integration of large numbers into industrial centers, it has been proposed that a commission be created, composed of members of both races, to formulate a better policy for mutual understanding and results and confidence. Such an effort is to be commended. Everyone would rejoice in the accomplishment of the results which it seeks. But it is well to recognize that these difficulties are to a large extent local problems, which must be worked out by the mutual forbearance and human kindness of each community. Such a method gives much more promise of a real remedy than outside interference. The message is clear from the President. One nation, one people, equal treatment for all. So that concludes this video on President Coolidge, a champion of equality for all. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you gained some insight, and I hope you learned something about President Coolidge that you did not previously know. If you have any questions or controversies, please leave them down below and I will be happy to answer them. If you liked this video, enjoyed it, learned something, please like the video. It means more than you realize. And if you've not yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so now. All likes and all subscriptions matter, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much once more for listening to this video. Again, I hope you learned something and gained something from it. All right, go off and now talk about the president to your friends, because I'm pretty sure they don't know either half of what I just said in this little lecture. So take care, enjoy the day, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next video. Peace.